In this video, we are going to run through exactly how to get started with a Lightroom Classic in 2026. We've done a couple of these videos in the past, but a lot has changed with Lightroom Classic. There's a lot of updates that come out every year, so it's definitely time for a refresh. Now, we're going to do this from a beginner's point of view, and we're going to cover everything from actually getting set up with Lightroom Classic. So if you've just got the program and you're just diving in, it all feels a bit overwhelming, this is the video for you. We're going to cover everything from how to get your photos into Lightroom, how to organize them, how to edit them, and how to then export them as well. So whether you are a complete beginner, first time you're loading up the program, or whether you've been dabbling a little bit already and finding it a little bit overwhelming and just struggling a bit, we are absolutely going to clarify everything. It's much easier than it looks, and actually it's an incredible program for photo editing. Now, at its core, Lightroom Classic is a photo editing bit of software, right? It's designed to edit photos, and specifically, ideally, raw photos. You can edit JPEGs, I do that all the time as well, but you're going to get the most out of it when you're editing raw photos. But separately to that, it's also a great organizational tool for keeping your photos all in one place and making it really easy to access them. So we're going to take a look at how you can do that as well, and actually the different tips and tricks that you need to make that work the best for you. Before we dive onto the computer and actually get started, one thing we should just cover off is that there are actually two programs within the Adobe Creative Cloud suite of programs that share the Lightroom name. You've got Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Now, we are taking a look at Lightroom Classic. They're very, very similar. Lightroom Classic is the original Lightroom, right? This is the kind of main program that most professional photographers will use. This program will use your desktop, your PC, to actually edit the photos, whereas the Lightroom app, which can be a little bit confusing, is more web-based, so it's using things like the cloud to edit your photos. We're looking at Lightroom Classic. This is kind of the program, this is kind of the one that you want to be using, and for me, at least, it is the best one to be using, and for most professional photographers, this is absolutely the way forward. So that just clears that up, because sometimes that can feel a little bit confusing at the offset. But with all that said, let's actually dive into Lightroom Classic now and start having a look at how we can get set up. Right, now when we load up Lightroom Classic, this is what we're going to be presented with. If it's the first time loading it up, it's going to prompt you to create a catalog. If you've already dabbled a little bit, I'm going to show you how you can get back to that stage. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to come up here to File, we're going to go New Catalog, and that is going to give us the opportunity to create a catalog. Now, essentially, we will probably only need one catalog, realistically. I use just the one catalog, and you can think of it a little bit like a book where all of your photos are kept. So this is essentially the overarching folder structure that we're going to use to keep all of our photos. This is where everything's going to live. So it doesn't really matter where we save the actual catalog itself. But for the purposes of this, I'm going to go ahead and just store it in this folder here. So we're going to go ahead and just title this Tutorial Catalog. And I'm going to hit Create. And what Lightroom is going to do is just ask me if I want to back up my old catalog. I'm just going to skip it this time. And essentially, Lightroom is now going to close down and then reopen with the new catalog. If it's your first time using Lightroom Classic, it'll ask you to create a catalog initially. I usually just title mine Main, and then I just have that for years, so no worries at all. And when it reopens, it'll actually open exactly like this. There will be no photos in it, but you will see that we now have an empty catalog, and it just says on the middle of the screen, click the import button to begin. Now, before we do that, let's familiarize ourselves a little bit with what we're actually looking at here, because it can feel a little bit overwhelming initially. Up in the top right up here, we've got our different tabs that we're going to be using within Lightroom Classic. Now, for the most part, and I would say for me, almost 100% of the time, and I use this program pretty much every day, I am just using Library and Develop. Library is where you're doing all of your organization. You're bringing photos into Lightroom and you're organizing them. You're maybe sorting through which ones you want to actually edit and which ones you don't want to edit. And then Develop, this is where we're actually going to be doing the editing part of actually using Lightroom Classic. So those are really the two tabs that we're going to be looking at today. And like I say, for the most part, those are the two tabs you're going to be using within Lightroom Classic. So to get started with Lightroom, we need to bring some photos in. Now the photos are going to live on your computer. So they're actually not living in Lightroom Classic, they're living in a location on your computer, and we're just pointing Lightroom Classic to those photos. So in order to make the most out of the organizational aspect of Lightroom, we need to make sure we're organizing those photos to begin with on the computer. I'm going to show you exactly how I do that, to make the most out of it in Lightroom Classic. So I'm going to bring up my folder here where I'm going to have my different photos stored on my computer. And the reason this is really important is however we structure this in our computer is how it will be structured in terms of folders and things like that when it comes into Lightroom as well. So I've just got a folder here called Lightroom Tutorial, which we're working in right now. And you can see I've got two different folders within here. So I've got Raw, which is where I'm going to keep all of my photos when I bring them in from my camera, right? So unedited, just straight from the camera. And then I've got edited. This is where I'm going to take my photos after we've edited them in Lightroom Classic. This is where I'm going to export them to. So I've got them separated out as the unedited versions and then the edited versions. If I click into the Raw folder right now, you can see I've got two more folders. I've got Tutorial 1 and Tutorial 2. And if I click into that, you can see there are actually photos within these two folders. Now, the reason for that is that I might want to name these in however, I want to organize them myself. I've got them Tutorial 1 and Tutorial 2 for the purposes of this tutorial. For me personally, I will normally name my folders based on what camera or lens I was using, because that's essentially how my job kind of works, right? I'm reviewing cameras and lenses, so I want to actually structure this from an organizational standpoint by being able to tell which camera and lens I was using. But you could absolutely structure it however you like, right? You could name these folders, for example, wherever you've been and the date. So let's say something like Madrid 2025 or Berlin 2024, or it could be even more in depth than that. It could be something like Brighton Beach, July 2024. Really, it could be anything, but it's just however it's going to work for you. And however you structure them in here, like I say, is how they'll be structured in Lightroom. So what we can do now is come back into Lightroom, and down in the bottom left here on the library tab, you can see there's this import button. So we're going to click that, and this is where we're going to find those photos. So I'm going to close this up and I'm going to open up my Lightroom tutorial. So we want to find that wherever we've put those photos, we want to find that over on the left here. So I've got my Lightroom tutorial folder here. I'm going to open the raw part here, and then I'm going to click Tutorial 1. And you can see all the photos that are in that folder are now listed, and they're all automatically ticked. Now, I can choose not to bring some of them in if I want to. I'm generally speaking going to bring all of them in. There's no real downside. You can also remove them from Lightroom later, but you can uncheck all down here if you want to, or check all just to make it a little bit easier. And then down in the bottom right, I'm going to click Import. That's going to bring those photos into Lightroom Classic, and essentially nothing has changed about where they're stored on the computer. We're now just pointing Lightroom Classic at those photos, so it knows exactly where those are. For the sake of this tutorial, let's bring in the second folder as well. And actually, just to prove a point, these photos in Tutorial 1 are JPEGs, whereas in Tutorial 2, they're actually RAW photos. So let's go ahead and click Import again down at the bottom left. And this time I'm going to click Tutorial 2. And you can see there's lots of photos in there. I'm going to click Import. And again, nothing's going to change about where those photos are stored, but now Lightroom Classic is pointing at those photos, so we can actually edit them within Lightroom Classic. And now you can see we are still in the library tab here, but we can see all of these photos, and I'm currently looking at the Tutorial 2 photos, so that's no worries. Over on the left, you can see we've got our different folders here. So as we bring more things in, you can see they're named the way that they're named on the computer. If I was to click onto Tutorial 1 there, you can see I can now see all the photos that are in that folder. And if I click onto Tutorial 2, I can see all of those photos as well. That's the beginning of how we can start to organize things within Lightroom, which is great. It's really, really handy to be able to open your catalog in Lightroom and see all of the different photos organized into those different folders, which is why it's so important to have that organizational kind of structure in place when you come to put those photos onto your computer in the first place. So that's great. Now we can actually go even further from here. We can actually zoom in on these photos within the library. So I can hold Control and just use the mouse scroll wheel to zoom in a little bit. And I can see these different photos. And what we can actually do is either scroll through with the mouse wheel, which is great, or I can use the arrows on my keyboard. So I'm just using the right arrow to actually be able to scroll through some of these photos. And what I can do, especially in a situation like this where I've taken a lot of photos of my dog Nala running on the beach, what I can actually do is work out which ones I might want to edit. So for example, I quite like this one. And what I might want to do is actually note that I like this one in particular. Now we can do that in a couple of different ways. There's lots of different ways, in fact, to actually denote to yourself that you want to edit that photo. But the easiest way, I think, is to press P on your keyboard. If I do that, you can see that it says flag as pick. And you can see there's a little flag now, just here, photos flagged. And if I was to actually click off that photo, you'll see if I scroll down, there's a little white border around it, very, very subtle, and a flag next to it. Right? So we quite like that photo. We might want to edit that. And essentially, I'm just actually letting Lightroom know this is a photo I want to flag for later. Now we can do that as many times as we want. I can also right click on the photo, set flag. I've got flagged. I can click unflagged or rejected. I can also set things like a color label. So I could set this to be, let's say, green. And now there's a green border around it. So it's easy to come back and find that photo if I want to. I can also come back and set a rating, but we'll get onto that in a moment. Let's continue looking through some of these photos and find a couple more that we might want to edit. I quite like this one. I'm going to flag that as well. So I'm going to press P on that one. And as I just move through, I quite like maybe this one. That's quite an interesting kind of action photo. So let's click on that one. Okay, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to flag those two photos. Obviously, if this were real life, I would be editing more than just the two. But for now, we'll just go with those two. Now, obviously, we don't want to have to scroll through and find the ones that are flagged. So now we can actually come down to the bottom right. We're still in the library tab. Where it says filter here, we can actually go ahead and click that. We're going to drop down and we can filter which photos are being displayed to us by different things, right? And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click flagged. That means that now Lightroom is only going to show these three photos that I have actually flagged. And that's a really, really easy way to be able to work out what you want to edit, what you want to use in Lightroom, and actually organize your photos a little bit like that. Now, that's the kind of beginnings of the organizational structure of Lightroom Classic, which is super, super useful. We've got a much longer video on that as well, which I'll link down in the description so you can see that if you want to, about how you can actually go even further with the organization. But that really gets you started. And this is essentially all I did for years of using Lightroom. Now we can go over to the Develop tab. So let's pick one to actually edit. Let's try this one. And if I click the Develop tab, you can see the photo is loaded in and we get all of these new options for how we might want to edit it. So we've done the organization in the library tab. Now we're in the Develop tab. You can see I've still only got the three photos here. If I want to change that, I can come down to the filter tab here and actually click filters off. And now I get all the photos back, come back to flagged, just the three photos here. We can do a little bit more than that when we actually have edited the photo as well. So what are we looking at here in the Develop tab? Well, essentially, there's a lot that we can do with Lightroom Classic when it comes to editing, especially with the raw photo. This is a very, very powerful photo editing tool, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming at first. Over on the left, we've got all of our different presets that we can use for these photos, right? For any photo, essentially. You've got a few different presets now. This is reasonably new within the last sort of year or so. But, you know, if we come down here to, let's say, cinematic, and I mouse over some of these, you can see that it will apply all kinds of different things to the photo. Now, this can be a good starting point for some photo editing. This can give you some ideas. We're not going to explore that too much in this video because it starts playing around with all kinds of other things, but that is always there for you to play around with. Over on the right is where we've got all of our different sliders and what I would call global sliders. So all of these are going to affect the entire photo all at once. So we're not affecting just the subject or just the sky, and we can actually do that ourselves, which I'll show you in a second. But these sliders are going to affect the entire photo. So for example, if I was to bring the exposure up, it'll bring the exposure up of the entire photo rather than just of our subject or anything like that. If I actually come down to highlights, I could bring those down. That'll affect things like the sky more because obviously that's where the highlights are. Shadows up is going to affect things like Nala here because it's affecting the darker parts of the image. I could come down to things like clarity, which is going to add a little bit of micro contrast, a little bit of texture as well. And I can do things like bring the vibrance up just to add a little bit more kind of color to the photo. Now, a lot of this is going to be completely different depending on the photo that you're editing, and some of it is worth just playing around with. You really can't go wrong. And something that's very important about Lightroom is we're not making any permanent changes to the image. The image, the raw image, exists on the computer, always will do, untouched. All of these changes are essentially made on top of those images. And actually, when we come to export, a new image is created with all of the adjustments that we've made. So we're not doing anything to that original image. It will always exist on the computer untouched. So this is completely non-destructive, and you really can't mess up. If you go too far, you can always go back. You can completely reset. There's a big reset button down here in the bottom right. It's very, very easy to undo anything. So you can really play around to your heart's content without having any concerns in the world that you're going to do any permanent damage to anything. So it is worth absolutely doing some of that. As we scroll down on the right here, you'll see there's lots of different tools that are available to you. Now, you might see in your version that they are closed up a little bit like this, and you can just open them up by clicking on that little drop down arrow there just to get them all opened up. Now, we won't go into every single one because we've done that in lots of different videos, and there's just a lot of tools here. Definitely worth having a play around. For example, the color mixer is a great way of being able to adjust different colors within the scene. So for example, here we could actually change that blue, something like that. In this photo, there's not a lot of other colors to actually play around with, but we can do things like the orange. We can make that a little bit richer. That's all in the hue tab here. We could come over to saturation and actually boost that orange if we wanted to, or maybe bring the blues out of the photo. There's a lot of blues in the photo. We could come over to luminance, which is going to be the kind of brightness of these different colors. We could make that blue darker. That's going to affect the sky quite significantly. Now, this can be a great way of coloring your photos. You also have color grading down here, which is where you can add colors to different aspects of the photo. So for example, we can add some blue to the shadows, something like that. Add some orange to the midtones, and maybe to the highlights as well. And that can be something that you might want to do, right? If you're going for a more stylized look. Again, this is more of an overview, but if you want more in-depth tutorials about how to do different things like this, I'll absolutely put a few different videos down in the description so you can see all of those for yourself. As we come down, we've got different options for things like denoising. So if you feel that you've had to use very, very high ISO, for example, this one not so much, this is ISO 400, but we can actually come down now. We've got this new tool in Lightroom, just denoise. All we would have to do is click that button, and Lightroom is actually going to work out a great way to reduce the amount of digital noise in the photo. It is incredible. It works specifically for raw photos. Lens corrections, so things like enable profile corrections. If I click that, Lightroom's going to work out which lens was used for this photo and then help to remove any slight distortion or anything like that, any vignetting. So if I turn that off, you can see, and then back on, you can see there's just a little bit of correction for the vignetting and for the distortion as well. Down here, we've got the transform tab. Now, I like to click auto and see what Lightroom's going to do. You can see that because probably I'm trying to keep up with Nala, there's a little bit of kind of this, it's not straight, right? The photo's not straight. So we can either go ahead and click auto. Lightroom's going to work out what it's doing there and kind of straighten it up. It's done a good job there, but we still need to change some things. So we can actually scale the photo up a bit, maybe even just move this over to the side and do something like that. That works quite well, I think. Or we can leave all of that. I'm going to turn this off, and we can do it ourselves, which we'll look at in just a moment. As we come down, we've got things like the ability to apply something called lens blur. So if I click that on, essentially this is going to help with a shallow depth of field look to the photo. It's going to work out the depth of the image. It's not going to probably work that well on this particular photo, but if I turn the amount up, you might see that it's starting to blur the background a little bit more than it otherwise would have done. Let's turn that off and back on. It's very subtle on this photo, and that's because we're already dealing with a very nice blurred background already, but this can work well to enhance portraits if you want that blurred background look without necessarily having had the right lens for the job at the time. We can do things like come down here to adding a vignette, and then we've got calibration, which again is another sort of color grading tool. Let's come back up to the top, and once you've sort of familiarized yourself with the different global sliders, we can look at the different tools that we've got up here. This is the kind of next step of editing your photos. So this symbol here is your main editing tab. This takes us always back to these global sliders. The next one over is your cropping tool. So this allows you to crop the photo in all kinds of different ways. So you can see it here. I can just come in and crop the photo however I might want. I can actually go over to the aspect and click on different aspects. So 16:9, for example, might be quite nice. Something like 4:3 might be quite nice. And I can always go back to as shot or original to get that original aspect ratio as well. Now, something else which is quite nice is I can rotate this image, which is how we're going to straighten this horizon. I can either do that by coming over to the side of the image and just clicking and dragging, something like that. And actually, let's reset that. Or I can use this slider here for the angle. I can move that left and right to actually kind of rotate the image. So I'll do something like that, which I think looks generally better. And then what I might do is also crop to get Nala a little bit more centered up, something like that. Now, when I click back over to the editing tab, you can see it sort of zooms in. So we've just got the cropped photo. If I go back to the cropping tab, you can see that I can still change that. I can go back, I can do whatever I want. Next to the cropping tab, we've got the remove tool. Now, this has come a long way within Lightroom, which is fantastic to see. This is such a useful tool if you need to get rid of dust spots, something that was just bugging you in the environment, whether it's a portrait, a landscape, whatever it might be. You can remove people. Let's go ahead and look at how this works. We've got 3 options for how we can remove things from the scene. We've got remove, we've got heal, and we've got clone. Now, for the purposes of this video, let's look at remove. And essentially, I can come over to the image. I can use the mouse scroll wheel to make the kind of cursor, the brush, bigger or smaller. And what I can actually do is remove almost anything from the scene, right? There's nothing particularly distracting in this photo, but let's say that I don't like whatever this is out at sea. I find that a little bit distracting. I can actually click on that. You can see that this locks in where we are. I can make that bigger, or I can make it smaller if I want to. Let's also grab something there as well. Now, I've got this ticked on, use generative AI. That means that Lightroom is going to use Adobe's generative AI to fill in those blanks. I don't have to do that. That works better for very complex scenes. Actually, for this situation, I probably wouldn't need to use generative AI. So we can either choose to use that or not by having that ticked on or off. You can see that because I've already now selected these masks, use generative AI is locked in. But if I cancel, I can tick that off. I can do this, and Lightroom's going to actually fill in those blanks automatically. And if I just come off the remove tab, you can see it's done a reasonably good job, but maybe not the best. So let's press Ctrl-Z to undo that. Back to the remove tab, I'm going to click use generative AI. And in this situation, I will now select those different areas, select that little dust spot as well by the looks of it, and then I can just click remove. And you can see if I come off the remove tab here, perfect, that looks fantastic and maybe arguably a little bit less distracting. Now in this photo, I don't think I would need to do that particularly, but it can be really useful. Next to that, we've got the red eye correction tab. I've never once used that in my entire time of using Lightroom Classic. That was true the last time I made this video a couple of years ago. It's still true to this day. So to be honest with you, that's probably not one you're going to be using that much, if at all. And then next to that, we've got the masking tab. Now this, for me, is really where Lightroom shines. There are so many ways to use masks. And essentially what this means is we are selecting areas of the photo to edit independently of the rest of them. So the other sliders are referred to as global sliders, which means they're affecting the entire image. The masking tab means we are affecting individual areas within the photo. And this is such a powerful tool within Lightroom. This is absolutely worth its own video. We've actually done loads of videos about all these different masks, but I'll give you a little bit of an overview here. So for example, we've got all these different options here for the kinds of masks we might want to do. Let's, for example, start with the sky. So let's click sky here. Lightroom is now going to mask out. It's going to work out where the sky is. And you can see it's done a great job. And what I can do is actually bring the exposure down. I could bring the contrast up. Maybe even something like come down here to dehaze and bring that up a little bit. And you can see that is affecting the sky and only the sky. Now I can see what kind of effect it's having by coming up to the masking tab. I can click on this eye icon, click and hold. That's what it looks like when we're not using that mask. That's what it looks like with the mask turned on. Let's add another mask. So now when we click create new mask, we've got the options here. Let's go select subject. Lightroom's going to work out the subject of the photo, which it has done very well. And what I can do is actually bring up the exposure of Nala just to make her pop a little bit more. Now, those are ways Lightroom can work out the masks for us, but we've got loads of ways of drawing our own masks as well. If I go create new mask, we can do things like brush, which allows us to literally brush onto the image like so. And then what we can do is just affect that area. Now, that's not a very helpful mask, so I'll delete that mask. But we can create a new mask like a linear gradient, for example, and I can bring that in something like this, for example. That's going to give us a nice kind of gradient mask like so. I could use that just to darken this foreground a bit. That could look really nice. I can also come in and do a radial gradient, so something like this. And we can change things like the feather. So if I bring this down, it's a much harsher mask. And if I bring that up, it's a much softer mask. And maybe I want to just brighten the center of the photo like so. I can also do things like bring a linear gradient in. Let's say I want to darken the top of the sky. But as you can see, it now goes over Nala as well. And I can intersect that with another mask that we might want to actually add on as well, so that we're essentially double masking this. It's starting to get a little bit complicated, but that's okay. So we're going to take a look at mask 5, which is this linear gradient. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to go intersect mask with, and then I can go select sky. And that means that it's only going to apply mask 5, which is that linear gradient, wherever we've also got the sky mask. So you can see it's now doing the linear gradient, but behind Nala. And what I could do there is darken that top part of the sky. Now I could come back into any of these masks again. So mask 1, for example, is the sky mask. And actually, if we want to, we could rename it, right? We can double click on the mask, and I'm going to call that sky. You can also click on any mask, like this one, for example, and press O on your keyboard to see where the mask is being applied to. So let's go ahead and click on that sky mask and then come down to saturation, where I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. It feels a little bit blue. And actually, let's go even further. Let's go over to the left. Let's go to adaptive sky. This is for the presets. And let's go down to something like sunrise. Now, if I click that, it's going to create another mask for the sky. It's going to call sunrise. Lightroom's done all of this itself. I can actually bring the amount of this preset is being applied down a bit, so something like that. And if I go over to that mask, sunrise, you can actually see exactly what it's doing. It's warming up that sky mask. And perhaps what I might want to do is just supplement that again with a radial gradient, something like over here, something like this. Let's make that reasonably big, and then bring that exposure up, because it looks almost a little bit like that's where the light is coming from. And I might just warm that up as well. Now let's go back over to the editing tab so that we get our global sliders back. I actually think that looks really nice. Maybe we bring the contrast up of the overall photo, and this is absolutely ideal. Now, what is great about Lightroom Classic is we can see how much we've done at any time. We can see it before and after by pressing the backslash key on the keyboard. So if I press that, this is how the photo looked originally, and this is where we've taken it to. So quite a significant difference. I can also look at it before and after side by side by pressing Y on the keyboard. So left is the before, right is the after. And again, you can see that's made a massive difference to the photo. So what would I do next once I've done this? Well, essentially what I like to do is when I'm happy with a photo that I've edited, I want to actually mark it as edited within Lightroom again. So I've got my picked photos, so you can see those 3 here. But what I want to do is mark this even more so as having been edited. Now you can do that in lots of different ways. You could use the coloring system. So for example, this one we've colored in green. I'm actually going to go ahead and actually make sure that has no color to it. So I could right click on this one, set color label, and set that as green. And that denotes now to me that that is an edited photo. But the way I like to do it is I'll set a rating for this photo of 5 stars. So how I'll do that is I'll just have the photo selected. This is the develop tab or the library tab, and I'll just press 5 on my keyboard. That's now separated out from the other photos that are already picked. It's still a picked photo, so it's still flagged for me to be able to see it that way, but now it has the 5 stars. So now if I look at all the photos all together, but if I go ahead and look at just the ones that I flagged that I like and I might want to edit, I've got those 3, and now I've got this one with the 5 stars, and it's got green around it as well. So it's easy to separate it out from the other photos, which is great. It's fantastic. And then the next step, and basically the final step, would be to take this out of Lightroom Classic. So essentially we're going to be exporting. And this is a little bit different to how we were doing things before, but we're going to have the photo selected. And actually, if you wanted to do more than one, you would just left click on this photo, hold Control on your keyboard, and then select whichever other photos you might want to export at the same time. For this time, we're actually just going to export this one photo. I'm going to right click on it down here. I'm going to go to export, and I'm going to click export there. And this brings up this menu here where we can choose where this is going to be exported to and how we want to export it. Now, initially, we need to choose where it's going to be exported to. So we can click choose here to find the folder we want to use. And I'm going to find my Lightroom tutorial folder here. Great. And rather than put this in raw, I'm going to put this in edited. Right, so I've clicked into that folder, and actually within this folder, I'm going to make a new folder as well, which is going to be called Tutorial 2. Now, I like to do that to actually match this up with the folders that are in the raw folder. So this is part of Tutorial 2. So now I want a Tutorial 2 folder in the edited side of things, so I can really easily keep track of the raw photos, the unedited ones, and then the edited versions. It's all nicely organized within my computer and within Lightroom as well. All I'm going to do is select Tutorial 2 as a folder, and then come down here to select folder. And you can see that the folder it's going to be exported to is exactly here. Now, I can click some of these other ones, like for example, put in subfolder. That's if you want Lightroom to create a folder for you. I don't need it to do that because I've done it myself. And we can come down here to things like renaming the file. Again, I don't need to do that personally. And then we've got file settings. Now, for me, I like to export it as a JPEG. You can export it as all these different things, but for the most part, JPEG is going to do the job absolutely no problem. And then we've just got quality. Now, I'll generally set this to 100, but that will mean that it is the maximum file size. So it depends what you want to use it for. If you want to print it, then absolutely maybe you want to go for 100%. If you want it for Instagram or something like that, 60%, 70% is a great kind of balance between file size and quality. That's really all I'll need to do. And I'm going to go ahead and click export. You can see it's exporting up in the top left here. So Lightroom has now exported that out of Lightroom. So I can actually come here to the edited folder, tutorial 2, and you can see that the photo is right there, exactly exported out of Lightroom. And now I have that. And yet, if I come back to the raw side, all of those raw photos are still there, completely untouched. I can still go back into Lightroom and I can do anything I want with this photo. I can completely reset it if I want to. So I can come down here and click reset on the photo, start again. I can actually press Ctrl Z to undo that as well, because all of those settings are on top of the original photo. So that should get you going with a pretty comprehensive overview of what we can do with Lightroom Classic, right? From the organization, from bringing things in, and then actually editing all the photos and exporting them out of Lightroom Classic. We have so many videos on this channel about Lightroom Classic because I love it so much. And there's so much you can do with it. So we've gone in depth on things like masking, coloring, exposure, how to shape light, how to kind of recover photos, denoising, pretty much every aspect, the presets, all of it really has been covered in depth. So absolutely, I'll link a few of them down in the description so it's easy to go and find those for yourself if there's something specific you want to see. Otherwise, absolutely pop a comment down as well. If there's something specific you would like to see covered, either we'll have a video and I'll let you know, or perhaps we'll even make a video just about that very topic. If you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, absolutely subscribe because we have new tutorials every single week. We have new stuff all the time, reviews as well of different things, but tutorials a lot about Lightroom as well. So if you're getting started with it, absolutely lock into Park Cameras because we have loads and loads of stuff on the way and loads of stuff to check out already. And with that said, all that's left for me to say is, as always, thanks for watching.